Hey y'all, this video is an introduction to statistical relationships. So the focus is on being able to identify when a research question or a hypothesis is about a statistical relationship. You will have to pose a research question and a hypothesis for your studies that you complete in this class. So when I talk about statistical relationship, I'm talking about when one variable changes, is there a systematic change in another variable? So do they co-vary? Do they change together? When one variable changes, are you able to predict, not perfectly accurately, of course, but are you able to predict that another variable might change in a certain way? For this to occur, there does need to be at least two variables because you cannot be in a relationship with yourself. I mean, I guess you could, but we're not going to do that in this class for statistical relationships. Have to have at least two variables. So our first type of statistical relationship is a difference between groups or categories, and this is a D relationship. And so your textbook uses this language. I'm going to stay consistent with it, and we're going to start with really basic forms of these relationships. So the idea here is that you have two variables. Our first variable is therapy type. So this is our first variable, number one. And then our second variable is this ISI, which is the insomnia severity in inventory. So this is a score. So this is a number, a score. And this is our most likely independent variable because it is the most likely cause. And we're not talking about research design at this point, but we're going to put our categories, our groups on our x-axis. So this is our x-axis here and our y-axis here. And so what we're saying is we're going to look at the difference in these two groups for the insomnia severity index score. So here we can see the level of the mean for this group. And so this is our group or category, right? So this is our group one is our treatment A. We can see that it looks like it's a 9. So this is a 9 is the mean. And then here we have the mean of insomnia, and that looks like probably a 22 about. So when we say that there is a statistical relationship between groups, we're saying that the difference between these two groups in the score, whatever your dependent variable might be, so this is our dependent variable, we're saying that there's some difference between them. And so here, this looks like a pretty big difference. We can see that treatment B seems to, that group that had talk therapy seems to have a higher mean, so more insomnia, more severe insomnia. And so this would indicate a relationship between our variables. And specifically, this would be a D relationship. So that's one example of a relationship between variables. Now, you can have other types of relationships. So the other type of relationship you might have is a relationship between quantitative variables. And these are going to be either positive or negative. We're talking about two variables for right now. This is a scatter plot. And we're saying that as one variable changes, we see that the other variable changes either in a negative or positive direction. So here we have scores on the exam, and that's our y-axis. And then our x-axis is that we have hours studying per week. So we have two variables again. These are both numbered variables. They're both quantitative, they're quantities. So we have hours studying per week, which is a number, and then score on an exam, which is a number. So this individual studied for 4 hours right there, and they got, well, it looks like about a 70, probably about a 70 on that exam. And so we can go through and look at each person and we can identify what they received for their score on the exam and how many hours they studied. But really we're looking for this pattern. So we're looking to see, is there a pattern of these variables changing together? So here we can see that there seems to be a positive relationship meaning that as hours studying per week increase, they get bigger, so does the score on the exam. And that would be a positive relationship. So again, this is another basic type of relationship. This is an R relationship, a relationship between quantitative variables. So those are our two basic forms of statistical relationships. And just as a quick review and comparison, for the differences between groups, you need to have two or more groups. And for it to be a variable, you can't just have one group. It would have to have at least two groups if it's categorical. So we're looking at the difference between two or more. We're going to focus on two groups, and we'll see if the semester allows us to really get into more groups in detail. Again, what we're doing is we're comparing the mean of the dependent variable by the different levels of the independent variable. So that means we have to have one categorical variable at least, and one quantitative variable. And that's what we're going to stick with for now. We'll have one quantitative variable, one categorical variable. We may get to a point where our categorical variable has multiple levels. It's going to be nominal. It is possible that it's ordinal, but really there's different analyses for that. Depends on how you're using the information. And then we have our bar graph. So that was what we saw in our example. We represent those group differences with bars. By contrast, relationships between variables are R relationships. We are talking about quantitative variables. We're comparing the strength of the relationship and that direction. So we're looking for that direction of the relationship as well. And we'll talk more about how we calculate whether or not it is a statistical relationship in other videos. You do have two quantitative variables. So in this class, we're going to use two quantitative variables for our relationships. They're both interval ratio, like the example of the hours studying and the score on the exam, and it would be a scatter plot. So let's try some examples. Do employees with higher job satisfaction tend to be more productive? So to identify if we're talking about a statistical relationship, not if there is one, but if we're asking a question about a statistical relationship, we need to look for two variables. Do employees with higher job satisfaction? So employees, that's just a population of interest, or the sample that we're collecting. Our first variable is job satisfaction. And because we have this higher here, we can say that it looks like this is going to be a number. But for now, again, we just want to identify, are there two variables? So higher job satisfaction, that indicates it's going to change. So that's our first variable. And then our second variable is productivity. So again, it looks like it's indicating that there's more of something or less of something. So we can say this is a variable. So this would be a statistical relationship that we are investigating. So this would be yes. Students who study at least 2 hours per day will score higher on the Psych 144 exam than students who do not. Now, this one, again, students, that's just our sample, our population of interest. We have a categorical variable of you study at least 2 hours per day or not, right? Because we have this who do not over here. And so that's our first variable, is whether or not you study 2 hours per day. Then our second variable is the score on the Psych 144 exam. So that, again, is a statement. This is a hypothesis about a statistical relationship. Do Fresno State students have high scores on the ACT? Fresno State students, again, that's just our population of interest, the sample that we collected. But we only have one variable. The only thing that's changing is ACT scores. So this is not a statistical relationship. This is not a question about a statistical relationship. Now, this is a question that you might ask, even though it's not about a statistical relationship. It's just that in psychology, we're not typically interested in a single variable. There are many examples of being interested in a single variable, but we often want to know how two or more variables change together, because it allows us to have more control over what we're studying. Or maybe we're interested in depression, but we want to know how is that different across different socioeconomic statuses. There's a lot of things that we could learn by looking at relationships. So we are going to investigate statistical relationships for your study. And you need to be able to write a research question and a hypothesis that includes both variables. So these are examples. The first two are examples of statistical relationship, a research question, and a hypothesis. So that's the end of this video. And the next video, I'm going to talk more specifically about D relationships, and then we'll do R relationships and talk about effect size and also inferential testing that we can do to evaluate if there is a relationship.